those who have had a relationship break up after 5+ years. Why? Why did it work for so long and then suddenly just not? I got blindsided. I love you but I'm not in love with you. Found out she was crushing on a co-worker and she ended it before she cheated. Better than the alternative. Very straightforward, though it doesn't hurt any less for the person in your position. Sorry, man. Unless someone cheats, it's usually not sudden at all. It's a slow, gradual, sometimes subtle change. Eventually one day you sit back and realize WTF, this isn't working out, and hasn't been working out for quite some time, and then you end it. I was dumped after 9 years together and I was absolutely stunned. I think what happened was that he stopped loving me, but didn't have the courage to end it and just kept the facade going. One of the most painful moments was realizing I was begging him not to end this. On my knees, pleading because I still loved him. I'm still embarrassed about that. It's one of those memories that make you cringe so badly. It left me somewhat broken. I've put my life back together in terms of a job and whatnot, but there's a part of me that feels like I've been thrown away, and if the person who loved me for that long threw me away so easily, I have a hard time believing that I'm worth someone's love and affection. My stance is that you can feel a bit embarrassed, but you should never feel shame for having expressed love so honestly, and for surrendering yourself to it so genuinely. I think after a period of time you fall into a routine. You've been with each other for so long it's not as simple as just going your separate ways. It's kind of an epiphany that you realize suddenly all the little things have added up. They've changed. You've changed. The dynamics of the relationship have changed. You just have to make the call in the best faith for both parties and it's not an easy thing to do. You get used to the security, the structure and comfort a relationship brings and the thought of being single again after so long is terrifying. Yeah, it only looks sudden, but to them, it's been a slow build up. They'd try to ignore it and keep doing the actions, but it's still there. Then usually something happens that lets it all out. I had a kid with her. She was a loser and had no means to support herself, let alone a kid, so I tried to make us a family. I got her a car, paid her car insurance, paid for her phone, and tried everything to make her a functioning member of society. I paid for her school. She lied about going to school and failed the first semester. I paid for daycare so she could get a job and she lost the job and would just spend the day hanging out with friends. Finally I just said screw it and asked her to be a good mom and take care of our daughter and keep the house nice. I'd come home and our daughter would have a loaded diaper crying in the living room while her mom was locked in her room going from show to show on Netflix. I tried everything to make it work. She was crazy and violent to boot. I'd try to leave to stay with a friend for the night to let things cool down, and when I finally did get away I'd get a call from the cops asking me to come back to the apartment because she called them saying I hit her. Thankfully the cops saw through the lies pretty easy, so that never got as bad as it could have. Finally I had a realization and snuck my daughter and I out of the house at 2 in the morning to avoid any confrontations and started a new life. She's left the state now and my daughter and me are just fine. We've even added a stepmom fiancé to boot. I guess it just took 2 years to realize that I could do it myself and people just can't be changed. It wasn't okay for a long time, but I wasn't able to let it go. I still loved him with all my heart and kept telling myself it will get better. I convinced myself that we can overcome and that in the end it will be worth it. It was just so freaking hard to let go. When we finally broke things off after 5+ years it was a relief. I was liberated from the emotional prison I had put myself into and I was free to enjoy my life again. It took a few months, almost a year actually, to be over him, but today I can gladly say that life has never been better. Just letting you know, it was the same for my ex and I. We were fortunate to only spend about 9 months from ignoring the symptoms to finally accepting the end. Life on the other side is better for me too. Now if I could only find a woman to stick around. Recently broke up with my girlfriend of 9 years. She is a really great person and I will always love her. But the reason we broke up is because her family took precedence over our relationship. She would check with her mother with decisions in our relationship that didn't involve anyone but the two of us. They also never liked me and apparently told her she could do better than me for years behind my back. I never felt like a part of her family, while my family was devastated that we broke up. We had been together for over 6 years, living together for 3. Everything was going great, or so I thought. In fact, when he came to me one afternoon and said very seriously, "Can I talk to you about something?" I jokingly said, "What? Are you going to break up with me?" Turned out, he had been thinking very seriously about the next step in our relationship. Our friends and family had started pressuring him to propose to me. None of the pressure was coming from me at all. I've always been of the mindset that if we were going to be together forever, then it didn't really matter where the wedding fell on the timeline. Not to mention we couldn't afford the wedding we wanted, and every time he started to think about it, he would panic and start doubting whether or not he loved me enough to marry me. He spent weeks debating it before deciding that if he was doubting it at all, then it wasn't meant to be. It's one of those things that you should know without a doubt. So he broke up with me and moved from our apartment in Manhattan to a neighborhood near his family in Arizona. The moment he got on the plane to Arizona, he realized what a huge mistake he made. If he waited until he found a girl that he never had a sliver of doubt about, he would die a very lonely old man. Fortunately for him, I forgave him, and 3 months later, I moved to Arizona to be with him, and we're getting married next year, pending the funds to do so. Thought I'd add a story with a happy ending to this thread. What a lovely story. Sometimes you don't know what you have until it's gone. And I bet this Arizona winter is much nicer than that Manhattan one, haha. We were together for almost 7 years starting in college. It was definitely a slow fade. He was finishing his education and thinking about the next stage of his life. Ultimately, we didn't want the same things, despite talking about the future frequently over the years. We got to a point where I wanted to get married and have kids, and he couldn't tell me enthusiastically that he wanted the same things. It was a long process of realizing that we were better friends and roommates than anything more. Eventually I broke it off on really good terms. I'm grateful that over a year later we're still friends. Honestly, it just never really worked at all. The whole relationship was broken almost from the start. It just kept going on because I just kept putting up with it, and being with someone was more important to her than being with the right one. Frick, this is me. She fricked my best friend. 8.5 years, 7.5 of it married. She fricked my older brother. Then she left me, married him 3 months later. A kid soon followed. 6 years later and they're getting a divorce. Karma may be a slow, methodical bee, but she's still a bee. Most of my long-term relationships lasted largely because one side was putting in more work than the other, to the point that it remained satisfying enough for the less emotionally interested party. Eventually, someone gets tired and realizes just how little the other side is contributing, and the death of that relationship begins. Mine was fairly sudden. In about a week's time, I realized that this relationship was not going anywhere. It was more of a recovery for her than anything. I loved her a whole heck of a lot more than I did love even myself. She was my everything, and I did everything to try to get her better. About 3 years of living with her, and 2 years dating. Prior, I was certain I was going to marry this girl. When the time is right, of course. Some things led to another, and arguing started. It was always there, but never this much. About 4 months, non-stop arguing about everything. I don't know what happened. I don't know what led to it all. I just know it happened. I didn't want to think anything of it. I've seen things like this happen a lot, and couples still recover. I thought it'd be over soon. Soon. Every freaking day. Soon. It'll be over soon. Everything will get better. I started getting depressed. I started hating myself for not doing better. Everything just started to go wrong. We hadn't slept together for over 3 weeks. We hadn't had a normal conversation in over 2 months. I still loved her. I couldn't let her go. I just couldn't. She's my everything. I didn't know what I'd do without her. But I didn't know what I'd do with her. Her recovery was still being worked on. She hadn't really recovered from much. Still the constant drinking and smoking. I realized it way too late. This is doing me more harm than good. This girl I loved is slowly killing me. With every drink she takes. With every bud she smokes. With every argument we have, she's killing me. I promised myself, to God, to every freaking body I know, that I'd get this girl to recover. Even if it meant I'd die for it. Turns out, I couldn't. I couldn't take it anymore. A week's time, that all happened. All that recreation and realization. I told her that I couldn't take it anymore. It broke my heart as much as it did her. It made me feel numb for months straight. I just stopped talking to her. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing her like that again. I knew she'd still be drinking, smoking and whatever else was there. I still loved her too much to see it happening before my eyes. So I just stopped talking to her, stopped seeing her, stopped everything with her. My parents always taught me to never be selfish, to always help others, and see my way through everything without causing harm to others. A tip to everyone on this sub: there is a time to be selfish, there is a time to be caring, but make sure one never takes over the other. I'm really sorry, man. Reading this I realized I was your hater who used to love me, and I really didn't think about it like this before. My ex-fiancé cheated, but the end wasn't sudden. I had been supporting her and I for about the 3 years prior to us breaking up. She had been working on her undergrad with aspirations for medical school, so I had no problems with supporting her because in my mind it was always for us. We traveled a lot the last year we were together for interviews for different med schools for her. Eventually, about 6 months prior to the breakup, she got an acceptance letter. That letter was the notable deterioration of our relationship. She started talking down to my family. She stopped saying when we, and started saying when I confronted her about this and she shrugged it off, saying there was nothing to worry about. She started getting more and more blatant with her disrespect of my family, and eventually with talking down to me even. We had moved out of our house because our lease was up, but we were supposed to move more than 400 miles away to a new city for med school within a month, so we had moved in with her father temporarily while we waited. I quit my job of 5 years, the kind with full benefits, 401k, etc. the week before we were supposed to move. Well, that last week she stayed out all night randomly 2 nights in a row and wouldn't answer phone calls from me or her father. The first night she said she fell asleep at a friend's, and the second we stayed up until 6:30 am and she finally strolled in, still smelling of booze. She tried to say she had fallen asleep at her friend's again. I really wanted to believe that. My last day at work I got a phone call from her mother saying that my ex had just admitted she was cheating on me, and her mom had called me as soon as she found out. I confronted my ex, took back my ring, and have never seen her again. This was 2 years ago, and we had been together 5 years. I'm not even sure I'm typing this for anyone besides myself. Age and life experience or lack thereof are major factors. I met my ex-wife when we were in high school. We were together almost 10 years. In that time we grew up. It reached a point where neither of us could grow anymore as people. The relationship became a barrier to us developing in a healthy direction. Breaking up was critical for us. That didn't mean we loved each other any less. We just needed room to grow. As someone who met there so relatively young, this scares me. When you start a relationship and you're young, say 22, well, there's a big difference between who you are as a person at 22 and who you are as a person at 27. Life goals change, opinions and viewpoints change, and sometimes you just grow apart. It's not that you dislike the person, you just no longer share the same values. It happens all the time. Because I stopped allowing him to abuse me and realized just how poorly he treated me, not just at home, but in front of other people and in public. He didn't think he'd done anything wrong. And you can't fix or reason with a person who thinks putting a gun to their girlfriend's head is an acceptable reaction to not having a mortgage payment, or not being able to get into your email. Okay, this is going to be an abstract answer, but I've been thinking about this topic a lot as of late. I think relationships mirror the way a planet orbits a star, or more likely the way a moon orbits its planet. The size of the planet and moon represent the amount of power that the person has in the relationship. I believe that there's always one person in charge of the relationship. For many couples it's like the Earth and the moon. There's a decent bit of balance there. But for some couples it's like Jupiter and Io, where one person has a disproportionate amount of power. And in relationships like this, it can be tough for the Io to get away from the Jupiter. This is why you see some girls with these dickhead guys and think to yourself, why is she with him? They are staying with him because the gravitational pull of that person is too strong for them to leave. And it takes an insane amount of power to get the person to leave them. So now that you kind of understand my metaphor, let me specifically answer your question. I think that once you've been in a relationship for 5 years, it's like you've achieved a steady orbit. Things are good and you just keep going along with the inertia of the relationship. But if you start to grow apart, it's like you start putting distance between the earth and the moon. And if you grow too far apart, you can actually succumb to the gravitational pull of another planet or even an imaginary planet that you think might be better than the one you have. So to me, this explains why relationships can work for a long time and then all of a sudden it seems like they don't. But in actuality, it's been a slow process of you gradually leaving the orbit of that other person until you are no longer gravitationally attracted to them and you then move on to something else. Awesome metaphor. I love it when people think like this. After 5 years, we broke up because I didn't believe Jesus was our Lord and Savior. We had a great relationship and got along great. This was through college, so we both grew up a lot over the 5 years. She became more devout religiously and actually got a job teaching at a Christian school. I was looking forward to marrying her because I wanted to raise kids with one religious parent and one spiritual, thus introducing the kids to religion but not indoctrinating them. She did not feel the same. I asked her why she stayed with me for so long then. She said, because I thought you would change. Sometimes things just aren't meant to be. I was with my ex for 7 years. As stated above, it took time to fall apart. She was always wanting to be in charge. She wouldn't give me credit for anything I've done and I changed the things she wanted me to. I finally had enough and moved out. She says how much she misses me and realizes how much I did do when I was there. But it's too late. I was unhappy for a while, felt things slipping away, and really wanting to work things out to make it better. She didn't want to work on it and got annoyed. Reason ended up being she was unhappy with what she was doing in life. No focus on school, weight gain and no real communication with friends, and wanted to change. We broke up and she got really into her studies and self-improvement, as did I after the depression broke. It ended up being a great year for the both of us. We didn't talk for almost a year. Started studying together at the library and now we are together again, better than ever. Funny how things work. I really needed to read that. My relationship isn't working and I know for a fact that it is because of me. I'm not currently happy with myself and I don't know if it is me that I'm too stupid to explain correctly or if she just can't understand how being unhappy with yourself can affect one another. Thanks, pal. I came home from Afghanistan completely fricked up in the head, so she divorced me. Now I'm fricked up and alone. Yaya ai. Merry Christmas. I moved into her house. She had owned this house when I met her but still lived at her parents' house for some reason. It was almost fully furnished already, but she was waiting on a living room set or something but didn't want to sleep in the house all alone. So I would stay a weekend, then half the week, then almost all week. I set up everything in that house. She can't even light the oven. I eventually said frick it and moved in. Huge mistake. I made that house a home, but his was always a house. He left me for a younger woman 2 weeks before Christmas. We were together for almost 18 years. I never saw it coming. It's been 2 years now and I still feel humiliated and betrayed. I stand behind the phrase, "It takes two to tango." I wasn't happy, but I felt like I couldn't say anything. On the other hand, he kept trying to say things and as soon as I caught a whiff of what he was beating around the bush about and got upset. Cause after 7 years who wouldn't get upset? He would back out. When he finally said we need to talk, instead of springing it on me and then backing out, I listened with as few tears as possible. I only got upset a week or so later when he told me he was going to date the girl I suspected him of cheating with. Kept insisting he didn't, but I don't think he knows that his friends suddenly sent me a ton of pictures of them together. Haven't spoken to him since. It was gradual with a sudden stop, but in the end I only allowed myself about 24 hours of being miserable before I said enough and started cleaning up his crap and working on getting over it. It was hard, but in the end I'm glad I didn't wallow in sorrow for what might have been. I told myself that it wasn't to be and moved forward. After 2 more miracles in my life disguised as disasters, I met my husband and life has been sweet ever since. But if I had still been hung up, then when I met my husband I would not have been ready. A number of things. Untreated depression. long-term unemployment, lack of communication about important things, caused our relationship of 7+ years to slowly deteriorate. It culminated in an adolescent roommate confessing to my girlfriend, BTW don't take on roommates who go off their meds regularly, and who snuck a hunting knife into our home to defend against me, and B, an experiment in a poly relationship that ended in an affair assault and a month of me being kept in the dark about it. I still don't really know exactly, without a doubt, what happened, and that's sorta why I left. I helped her find a new home, tried to help her get a restraining order, lended a hand throughout the move, dumped our crappy roommate's stuff on his front lawn. That was fun actually, but left after that. I just didn't trust her completely anymore, and I don't think she trusted me entirely either. If you're looking for advice by making this thread, I suggest this: take care of yourself, and make your physical and mental health a priority. I don't think you can care for a partner if you can't care for yourself, and you may be doing more harm than you understand by letting things go untreated. Well, after 4 years, getting a place together, getting engaged, and no signs of being unhappy, she one day decided to get up and leave me for this guy that she never even met on the other side of the country. Just out of nowhere. Didn't want to be with me. Then they broke up a month later and she wanted me to go and pick her up. Frick, that. Turns out she cheated on me with multiple people our entire relationship. It wasn't a sudden end. More of a one day we realized we were heading in different directions thing. He wanted a house in the country, family, etc. I wanted an apartment in the city with a few dogs and no kids. I think we were meant to be together exactly that amount of time. We got each other to where we needed to be, each other's launching points for the rest of our lives, if you will. I encouraged him to go back to school and he will be graduating and plans on asking the girl he's with to marry him. I moved across the country and learned how to be independent. We catch up about once a year to check on each other. There are no hard feelings. I hate to start off all fairy tale. I'm 41 and I've been dating long enough to know that fairy tales are reserved for Disney movies and the genetically gifted. We met about 8 years ago. I considered myself undateable. I had just gotten custody of my daughter, left my job to move the two of us closer to the grandparents on both my side and my ex-wife's side. I was working retail, in a mall, at 33 years old and living in my parents' basement. Literally, we met on POF, and I was upfront about my situation and that I was working on improving it. The day she showed up to pick me up after work for our first date I was a nervous wreck. I expected to be stood up when she finally came to her senses about what a yacht she'd agreed to meet. From the moment I sat down in her car and we started talking, I was comfortable. She was comfortable. It just fit, and that was weird for me. We went for coffee, and the conversation didn't stop. We decided to grab a drink at a pub next door, and we kept talking. Our glasses were empty and we couldn't stop chatting. I suggested that we get some beer and head down to the ocean. Her eyes lit up and we hit the beer and wine store for a 6-pack. We talked, made out, and eventually she dropped me back at home. Through the course of our 8 years together, we were married for 5. We broke up once in the beginning because she wanted a child of her own, and I didn't want any more kids. We eventually agreed to try without birth control, and see what happened naturally. Nothing did. Some intense negotiations followed, and I agreed to try hormone therapy and artificial insemination. Neither worked. She wanted to try in vitro, and that's where I had to stop. Today, we've been separated for 3 months. We still talk. We still love each other, but you can't compromise on a kid. Christmas is hard this year. My daughter wants her back in our lives. My parents want her back in our lives. And I want her back so much that sometimes when she comes over, I have to head to the bathroom to compose myself. My daughter and her get along so well still, and it kills me. I still can't bring myself to want what she wants. You know what? After 5 or 7 or 10 years, you're hugely different people to the people you both were when you started the relationship. And you know a lot about the other person, good and bad, that it's hard to imagine knowing about someone after 6 months or a year together. So if you've both been growing in different directions for the last 5 years, there come crisis points where you have to make a decision as to whether you still want to continue to have a relationship with this person, who you met in the deep and distant past when you were much younger and more naive. Every relationship has those crisis points, and some people get over them and stay together, and others don't and can't. For me it was drinking. I was promoted at work and became a supervisor. The job was too much for me. I was in charge of 10 people for 12 hours a day. It doesn't sound like a lot, but some people will just weigh you down. It's always the little things that get to you. For me it was death by 1,000 paper cuts. 1 drink after work became 2. 2 became 4. 4 became drunk. Sadly, 4 became bulk out. I fell into a pattern of beer before everything. She cared enough to stay with me for 2 or 3 years before she told me she had had enough of my drinking and I had to change. I went to detox in July. Had she supported me through it, but I started drinking again shortly afterwards. My birthday came in late November, and I almost drank myself to death full on alcohol poisoning. She left me just before Christmas last year. I'm still really hurt by it, but I fully understand why she left. Who wants to watch the person they love turn into a monster that can't control themselves? I never became violent. I want to make that perfectly clear. I never, ever hurt her physically. But I became distant, and through that I became emotionally unavailable, which turned into a form of abuse. We would sit in the same room together and not talk. I was always drunk when I wasn't working. She left me just before Christmas last year. I came home work and all her clothes were gone. I went to detox again for 2 weeks, and when I came home she had taken the last of her stuff. I don't blame her for leaving. I would have done the same if it were reversed. I tried to win her back, but there were too many hurt feelings. If there's a moral to this story, it's this: never, never stop doing the little things. Hold her hand, kiss her cheek, brush her hair, rub her feet, buy her flowers, hide her bra, act. I know I fricked it up and I'll never forgive myself. I'll spend the rest of my life helping others to keep their relationships fresh. One of my favorite things that we did was to hide a little toy around the house for the other one to find. It showed we had enough love for each other to surprise the other one every day. It's been about a year since she left and it still hurts the same today. I'm typing this though tears of regret. All I can say is never stop showing the one you love how much you love them. It's all about the little things. The little things keep it going or destroy it. Make it count. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.